Now that we've seen how a class design is created with a little bit of object-oriented flavors to it, let's look at an array of these objects. In the last video, we talked about this class and developed it to a certain extent. We had two fields that were originally there. We made them private so that we could hide the information and protect it. We created a constructor which automatically creates a student info object. This was the method that controls how an object is output, which produces this output over here. These were called mutator or modifier methods that allow us to change it from the outside world, but in a more controlled way, which is what you want. And then we worked the client code down from about 5 statements down to just these 2. So that's where we left off last time. Now, let's go ahead and add a couple of more methods to expand the idea of access to these private data fields. And these are called accessor methods, and they start with the word get. They allow us to output the name and the ID separately if we wanted to. And we could do it this way. We could say x.getID and print it, and we just get the ID field or the name field using getName. We could create several objects, and here is a second instance of an object. We're calling it A and giving it the name Cindy with an ID of 5678 and outputting that information. We could keep going on and on with this idea and have as many objects as we want. Now, this brings us to the idea that it starts to get cumbersome processing all of these objects separately, so let's put them in sort of a collection or a data structure and create an array of student info objects. And here is an example of that. We took the 5 student info objects that we had originally and we just gave them to this array. So list 0 gets X, list 1 gets A, and so forth and so on. And you can see that the printout results in pretty much the same thing we had before. We're just changing the structure. Now here is even a better way of doing it, where we create the array, and then instead of creating separate objects first, we just create the objects and immediately give them to the array to keep track of. And the output is essentially the same. We're just changing the way the structure and the processing works. We can also call the accessor methods getName. We can also call the getID field accessor method if we wanted to do that. Now, the cool thing about arrays is that it's really easy to process using a loop. And instead of having 5 different output statements that we had before, we now have a loop structure that prints the object one time. And we use I as the index for this array, and we still get to print all of the values in the list. We just set the loop to go from 0 to the end of the list and print list I. We can do the same thing with the IDs and with the names. So you get the idea of how this processing can take place and how much better it is if you have them in an array. You have a lot more flexibility and control. We can even make the array go backwards if we wanted to. We set the beginning to the end position. We travel down towards the beginning position, subtracting 1 each time, and output the name or whatever we want to output. We could even send it into a sorting routine, perhaps that sorts this list by name. And you could output all of the information, but now they're in sorted order. Avery is now in position 0, Aiden is in position 1, and so forth. So this gives you a basic idea of how using a list of objects makes the processing a lot more flexible and a lot more convenient to do.